Good morning. Welcome back to another episode of the Spot Up Pod. Okay, so I have three key questions I want to go through in this episode. So the first one is who made the Spurs' regular season roster? What is the impact of the team exercising the team options for Jeremy Sochan, Malaki Branham, and Blake Wesley? And then finally, what are some overall takeaways from the preseason now that it is over and the regular season is on its way? So let's get to these three key questions. So the question number one, who made the regular season roster? So going into Saturday morning, the San Antonio Spurs had 15 players already on standard contracts, and they had two players on two-way contracts. That meant that they had a decision to make with four players who were on training camp contracts still. Those players were Riley Minix, Jamari Bouye, Malachi Flynn, and Brandon Boston Jr. So the Spurs on Saturday morning, they ended up converting Minix's training camp contract into a two-way contract. So now Minix got that final two-way spot. And then because league rosters had to be finalized for the regular season by 4 p.m. Central Time on Saturday, they had to end up waiving Bouye, Malachi Flynn, and Brandon Boston Jr. So Bouye is most likely going to end up on the Austin Spurs roster in the G League because on Friday morning the Spurs actually, not the San Antonio Spurs, but the Austin Spurs traded for his G League rights on Friday morning. So the San Antonio Spurs, had to sign him, and then they had to waive him in order for him to be part of that process in the future where he can play in Austin. It'll be interesting to see, though, if the Spurs do add maybe like Boston Jr. to the Austin Spurs, because they are able to do that now that he was on the San Antonio Spurs training camp roster. And then, regarding Flynn, I don't know if he'd be ready to go to the G League. Maybe he still, holds out to see if maybe there's an NBA spot for him somewhere else. So again, the Spurs did have to waive three players on Saturday. So basically, that's kind of where the roster stands. What it means, though, that the fact that the Spurs have a full roster of 15 players on standard contracts and three players on two-way contracts is that going forward throughout the season now, the Spurs cannot add anyone to the team unless they either waive a player or if they do like a player for player trade. So that's just something to keep in mind when February gets closer to the trade deadline, because as we saw with the most recent move with the Spurs when they acquired Jalen McDaniels to get a future second round pick from the Sacramento Kings, they were able to do that at that time just because the offseason roster still allowed for 21 players. But now going forward, they can't do a move like that because obviously it'd have to be a player for player trade, or they'd have to waive someone first. And teams will probably be calling the Spurs later on in February in case that they're trying to unload salary, because the Spurs are pretty far under the luxury tax. They're still $21 million under the tax, and they have about $3 million left of their room exception to absorb a contract. So again, that's just something to keep in mind later on, in the middle of the season once the NBA trade deadline gets closer. But the regular season roster is ready to go for next week on opening night with 15 players on standard contracts and three players on two-way contracts. Second question is, how do the team options impact Jeremy Sochan, Malaki Branham, and Blake Wesley's futures with the Spurs? So this past week as well, the Spurs picked up the team options on Wemby. That was obviously, that was expected. Jeremy Sochan, that was also expected. Branham and Wesley, I think before training camp, it was more so a question of whether or not the Spurs were going to exercise those two players' options, or not player options or team options. But then as the preseason came along, and you just basically saw that, yes, Branham and Wesley were going to be part of this team for obviously for this season. They already had guaranteed contracts, but also at least the Spurs didn't just want to waive them. I mean, let them go into free agency for nothing this coming offseason. And Wesley's had a pretty good preseason where he looks like he might be in the 10-man rotation. So the Spurs did pick up the team options for all four players. And so what I wanted to do now is focus a little bit more on why this coming season is very important for Sochan, Branham, and Wesley. So as I mentioned, all three players do have guaranteed salaries going into next season, the 25-26 season. But what's interesting is that come July, the Spurs can now start negotiating with these three players, Sochan, Branham, and Wesley, on contract extensions in the event that the Spurs wanted to, have them as part of the future. So I think that the player who's been in the rotation, who's going to probably be the starting power forward, is Sochan. And so, yes, I think that Sochan is going to probably be in those negotiations with a contract extension next summer. So that's why this is a key season for him, as I've talked about here on the Spotted Pod, to really have a good season coming up. Especially obviously the Spurs know he's really good defensively. He's one of their most versatile defenders out there. Can play in the front court and on the perimeter. But I think offensively, this is where they want to see what kind of growth is he going to make here. And obviously in the preseason, he's back to playing his normal role of power forward, where he can play a little bit more off ball, cutting, rebounding, attacking the rim, as a secondary or third playmaker. once the ball gets to him. And so I think that's what he needs to show. He had a pretty good preseason, scored a lot of points in the paint, and so I think that's where they're going to be looking for him. And if the wide open three is there, that's obviously a shot that he says that he's worked on. So we'll see now that the season's coming if how much that work is paid off. We've seen that he's now gone back to the two-handed free throw shooting form as well in a few preseason games as well. And so that's why this is crucial for Sochan this coming season, because again in July the Spurs can start negotiating with him on a contract extension. Blake Wesley is also in a peculiar situation, just because when we look at the Spurs' future point guard situation, two of their point guards currently on the roster, they're actually going to be unrestricted free agents next summer. So those two players are Chris Paul and Trey Jones. Both players are going to be unrestricted free agents. So for Wesley, this again could be a key season to see if he can not only crack the 10-man rotation, but then maybe be an option for the backup spot in the future, in the event that maybe the Spurs want to move Stephon Castle to the starting lineup next season. Then obviously there's an opening there if Paul and Trey Jones don't come back. So then that could be an opportunity for Blake Wesley. So again, that's a key reason why this could be an interesting current season coming up for Blake Wesley, to see if maybe he can secure the team's future backup point guard spot in the event that those two players don't come back. So again, he can also negotiate next summer on for a contract extension. And then Branham as well. Branham he wasn't like Wesley in terms of cracking the 10-man rotation most of the games where the team had most of their players available in the preseason. So again, he's going to be more so there, I think, as a depth option. If a player gets in foul trouble in a game or someone's hurt during a game, Branham can come in at the wing spot, play the 2 or the 3, whether he needs to start or come off the bench. That's where the Spurs can still have him in the lineup. And then, so again, that's kind of where I see why I say that this is a crucial season coming up for all three players: Sochan, Wesley, and Branham. And then regarding the Spurs bringing back those players for next season, they're already going to have limited roster spots going into next summer. So what I mean here is that once the draft comes around, the Spurs are already going to have 11 players on guaranteed contracts for next season. They're going to have not only 9 players already from this current team with guaranteed contracts, but then they're still going to have their own first-round pick in 2025, plus they're guaranteed to get the Atlanta Hawks' pick in 2025 as well. So again, there's going to be 9 players plus 2 new draftees coming onto the team next season. And so again, when the regular season comes next October in 2025, you can only have up to 15 players on your standard contracts. So again, that's basically 11 spots already occupied on the roster before free agency even begins next summer on July 1st of 2025. And then there's actually a chance that the Spurs could have up to 13 players on the roster. This one is a little bit more of a question mark, because the Charlotte Hornets and the Chicago Bulls would have to do very well this season, surpass the expectations that are out there for them. And so what this means is that the Spurs do get the Charlotte pick if it lands 15 through 30. So basically it's protected top 14. Charlotte is supposed to be a little bit better, but maybe they're still going to probably be a lottery team, is what everything looks like. And then Chicago as well, their pick is protected top 10. So again, unless those two teams really have good seasons and surpass the expectations, then the Spurs could end up adding 4 rookie players next season, 4 draft picks in the first round of the 2025 draft. But again, those last 2, Charlotte and Chicago, don't look very likely right now, if everything goes according to plan. So again, most likely the Spurs are going into this summer with 11 players on the roster. And so when we just talk about them picking up Wesley and Branham's contracts, obviously they have those 2 players on the roster for this season. So obviously they'll play out the season, but then also next year, those 2 players will as well be on the roster as well. So in the event that, let's just say, the Spurs don't come to contract extensions with Wesley or Branham, and it looks like those players are going to become free agents in 2026, and the team maybe doesn't have any future long-term plans with either of those players, well, then they still have not only this year but also next year to look at maybe see if there's a trade out there for either of those players before those players become free agents in 2026. So again, that was one of the other reasons why picking up their team options, those 2 players, is why that's also something to consider for the Spurs, and the fact that they made that move. All right, so now the third final question is overall takeaways from the preseason. So obviously, the Spurs played 5 preseason games. I think they went 2-3 by the record, but again, preseason records don't really matter. So most of the rotation players, they were out for a lot, different games here and there. Wemby especially he only played in 2 games that we saw him in, and really just like 2 halves really. So basically what we can take away after those 5 games is that the players who look like they're in the rotation, the starting lineup Coach Pop used most of the time, when the players were all together, was Chris Paul at the point, Julian Champagnie at the 2, Harrison Barnes at the 3, Jeremy Sochan at the 4, and then Victor Wembanyama, of course, at the 5. And so obviously, we would just say, right away, yeah, this is the starting lineup that's going to start next week in Dallas on Thursday. But Pop did throw a little wrinkle in there after I don't know if it was the Houston game or the one of their road games, the Houston game or the Miami game. He said something along the lines of like this when asked about, what does he think about the starting lineup? He's like, well, this lineup's not set in stone yet. So again, unless he has some sort of surprise coming into Thursday in Dallas, that would be the only thing. Would be a surprise to see somebody else, a different player in that starting unit. Obviously, we know that once Devin Vassell eventually gets healthy, he's going to end up joining that starting unit. So someone will have to end up going to the bench from that group. But again, right now, I would just say, just based on everything we saw, of course, based on preseason observations, that does look like the starting 5. Then the players in the second unit who are most likely going to get minutes are going to be Trey Jones at the backup point. Blake Wesley, like I mentioned, really his defensive presence, his energy, his rebounding, his playmaking for his teammates. He's probably going to be the backup 2. Stephon Castle, who Pop said can play the 1, 2, or 3. He's probably going to be the backup 3 on paper, but we know that we saw Castle initiate a lot of offense during the preseason, so he's going to be on the ball a lot, I think, especially off the bench whenever like Chris Paul's out of the game, or maybe when he and Trey Jones would kind of share point guard duties at times. So again, even though, yes, on paper, Castle will be the backup 3, he's going to play more so on the ball when he's out there. We obviously saw Keldon Johnson play there at the backup 4, and Keldon, kind of got, used his energy and, his creativity around the rim to start putting up some numbers there in those final few preseason games that he played in. And so he's probably going to have a similar role. He's going to be one of the go-to scorers on the bench unit. And then, of course, Zach Collins is coming back from injury, and he was able to play in a few preseason games as well. And so he's right now probably going to be the backup center to Wemby here. So that looks like the 10-man rotation that's going to, end up starting the season this coming week in Dallas on Thursday. And I would say some depth pieces or maybe situational players that can come in are Malaki Branham, like I mentioned earlier in the event that, someone's, in foul trouble in a game and they need a wing player, they could go to Branham. Charles Bassey's there in the event that, again, one of the bigs, is out for a game or they're in foul trouble. So Charles Bassey could be more so like a backup 5. And then I think the player who's really interesting here, and especially I think he's going to put a little bit of pressure on Collins to perform pretty well in the first few games of the regular season, is Sandru Mamukelashvili, because we saw that Mamu had a very good preseason, especially shooting the basketball with his playmaking, his energy that he brings to the team. He was highly efficient there, in the pick and pop situations or using that DHO action. I actually wrote a piece over on the Spot Up Shot just about the connection that Mamu and Stephon Castle have already made, just in that DHO to pick and pop action that Castle's easily able to find Mamu. Blake Wesley found Mamu, Trey Jones, a lot of different, even Chris Paul, all the guards, point guards found Mamu very easily. You could tell he definitely worked on his shot this summer. He actually talked about how he actually does some 2-a-days sometimes, where he's actually going to the gym not only for practice with the team to get up some shots, but then also maybe later on in the day he'll go back and just get up his own shots. So I think that, again, that kind of puts a little bit of pressure on Zach to be productive early on, because if he's not, and then the Spurs know they have a player who's ready to be productive, at least offensively on the offensive end in Mamu, that might be a player that they look at, to come off the bench at the small ball 5, because we know that, Mamu's, not going to surpass Keldon in the depth chart. So obviously Keldon's going to get his minutes no matter what. So again, that's why I think that this is going to be an early, maybe 5 to 10 first regular season games next week when they start, just to see, how Zach performs. Obviously, the Spurs know that he's coming back from injury. So that's why it's going to be a little interesting to watch that I think that is one of the positional battles early on in the regular season, is that backup 5 role between Mamu and Zach Collins. Again, I don't take too much from the preseason games, just because, like I said, Wemby was only in 2 of the games, and he's obviously their best player. He's their core player that they're going to run a lot of their offense through and things like that. So again, it's too hard to put too much into these games. But I guess just one of the things that the players talked about throughout training camp and throughout these 5 preseason games was the defense. That's definitely been the focus for them this year is the defense. A lot of the guards and wings talked about how they want to put more on-ball pressure this season, especially with players like Castle, who is known for his perimeter defense, player like Blake Wesley, who can come in and provide some defense. And then even Trey Jones says he wants to be a little bit more aggressive. He said something along the lines of like, it's better to err on the side of being too aggressive defensively rather than, being, not doing that, doing the opposite. And the guards and wings have just basically talked about how, like, now that they've had a year with Victor, they know how much room he can cover in the paint in the event that, they get beat and somebody gets by them. And so they are ready to, put a little bit more pressure and be a little bit more hounding there on the ball in the front court to make sure that the opponent's offense doesn't get into their offensive sets so easily or so comfortably. And then different players in the front court have talked about how they need to support Victor in the event that he's going to block shots or deter rim attempts. Then they need to be switching around and rotating the other front court players and players out on the arc to make sure that they're covered, that the whole defensive unit is collapsing and helping out Victor in the event that he needs to protect the rim there. So again, I think defense has definitely been the main focus of this training camp. And again, we'll get to see it as the offense kind of comes along a little bit differently as the season begins, with like Chris Paul running more of the point in the starting unit, maybe Castle and Trey Jones running the backup point guard roles together at different times throughout the off the bench. And then also, of course, Wemby was only there for 2 games, so he's gonna command a lot of the offense in terms of playmaking, taking some different shots, getting to the free throw line, things like that. So again, you can't really look at the offense too much until you actually see Wemby out there more often for the team. And then I would just say too that the team's gonna definitely need to build more chemistry, things like that. And even Coach Pop said just the fact that Victor only got to play in 2 preseason games, he might be a little rusty, especially probably with his jump shot. That's going to be probably understandable the first few games here for Victor, since he didn't get to play in he only got to play in 2 preseason games, and so the team is probably going to let him kind of ease into the regular season, though he will be getting his minutes early on in the regular season. So that kind of wraps up this episode. Again, the regular season begins on Thursday. The Spurs are going on the road to Dallas, and then from there, the season begins. It's like I was looking at the calendar, and yeah, it's just like I know right now the preseason and in training camp, it's like it's kind of slow, like the schedule going along. But then once the regular season gets here, it's like you have a game, you maybe have one day off, then here's another game, and then you get a day off, and then here's another game. Oh, and then here's a back to back, and it's like, and then as the season starts going, and again, I'm just probably speaking more so for myself because covering the team, but after a while, it's just going like every other night there's games and stuff, and so you kind of like start looking at the calendars like, when's there like 2 days off, just to kind of get a break here and kind of just just kind of ease a little bit. So yeah, so it's about to kick off here on Thursday, but it's going to be very exciting, and I'm really excited to cover a full season here at the spotupshot.com is where I'll be doing a lot of my writing, and then also here on the Spot Up Pod, I'm gonna my goal is to get up about 2 episodes a week this year. I know on the old site that I used to work at Project Spurs, I used to host the Spurs cast there, and there I would just do one episode a week during the regular season. And so for me, I will say, I definitely want to try to get two episodes up a week this year, but it really depends on the schedule of the Spurs. Basically, I never record on a game night because I want to have new information, after the games. So for sure, at the beginning of the week, I'll definitely have an episode, probably every Monday. It's looking like, or Monday or Tuesday, somewhere early in the week, and then I'm hoping to have some up by like Thursday or Friday at the end of the week if the Spurs didn't have a game the night before. Because again, I like to do my research and kind of build up some different topics and things like that. So again, I'm really excited, really ready to kick off this new season of Spurs basketball and watch it and analyze it and break it down and all that good stuff. So I definitely hope that you subscribe and you follow the Spot Up Pod, and then also over on Substack that you subscribe to my email newsletter over on the spotupshot.com.